And welcome to the Beyond the Dollar Signs podcast with your host, Mark Taylan. Mark, good to see you. How are you?
Hi, Bill. Great to see you.
Yeah, so this is an interesting topic. You've touched on this topic before, and the topic being home equity. But you're going to take this in a little bit more depth and why home equity matters and how it can be an asset in retirement. And I think that will surprise a lot of people because I think most people, their largest investment's their home. And they typically think, well, if I sell my home, I'll realize a big gain and I can move from there. But there are a lot more options, which you're about to lay out for everyone to know about.
Yeah, absolutely. Most clients, it tends to be their biggest asset is their
Yeah.
home. And so, we work with a lot of clients when we're doing retirement planning. And a lot of times you don't think of the home as an asset to be used at some point in that retirement, lifespan, let's call it. And so, we recently did a podcast. Actually, we did two podcasts on reverse mortgages and their application. There's many applications, and when we meet with clients, I think it's important to discuss that asset and how it's going to be used. You know, in the early stages, I always ask clients when we meet with them is this your forever home? What's the plan going forward?
Yeah.
And sometimes the home is too big for them, right? Maybe it's a 2-story. Now they're empty nesters. They're sitting in a 3,000 plus square foot home with 2 stories and, with so much house. Certainly as time goes on, even though the kids are gone, you end up filling up those rooms too, right? So
Yeah.
inevitably, the house becomes, kind of manageable because, you just accumulate more things. But inevitably, we talked about in the previous podcast about right sizing, and maybe at some point that home becomes too much and you right size. So, there's different scenarios when it comes to using your house as a tool in retirement. Um, often a house isn't like a bank account in a sense that you can't just come in and say, well, my house is worth $2 million or $1 million. I want to borrow 100,000 from my house. There's typically isn't a card that you can just say, I want to go to the bank and I want to make a withdrawal unless you have some mechanisms in place, right? And so often in retirement, usually the house is paid off or almost paid off, right? And so if that is the case, what I always recommend is look, the only way to utilize that equity from the house is number one, you can sell the house and whatever those net proceeds are, that's one way to do it. But the second way is to have a home equity line in place. And that way you have access to money if you need it, against the house, right? And it tends to be a really good tool that I find useful for clients to have because sometimes in a pinch, something big comes up. They need to do a renovation on a roof or they've got a large expense that they need to cover.
Yeah.
And maybe, maybe we don't have enough liquid assets and everything's invested in the market and it's not a favorable time to sell stock for whatever reason. And so the home equity line is a great way to bridge, right? Bridge and be able to use that equity. And then at some point in time, when the stock market, let's say, is favorable and it's a good time to sell, maybe that's the time that you liquidate that holding and you pay off the home equity line of credit. So I find it to be strategically a great way, a great thing to have is a home equity line of credit on the house at some point. Even though you may never use it, but it's just nice to have. Other applications of that could be, let's say you're ready to right size the house. You are ready to move. And, what's the process of buying that forever home or that final home? Sometimes utilizing the home equity line as the means of a down payment to bridge, bridge that gap to be able to buy that next home, right? And so, different applications that I see of using the home in a very strategic manner.
So I have heard that it's difficult to get a home equity loan if you have already retired. I don't know that that's the truth. But
Uh-huh.
if it is it wise to establish a home equity loan before you retire?
Yeah, absolutely. You bring a great point, and that point is that when you retire, you don't have the same level of income typically, right?
Hmm.
So that's something that you want to do prior to retiring is get that home equity line in place, right?
Okay.
And so, usually depending on the area they're in, you usually want to have a pretty good sized line of credit. One of the things that people maybe are not aware of is that when you have a home equity line of credit, that first 10 years, you only for number one, you only pay on what you draw. So let's imagine you have a $250,000 line of credit on the
Okay.
house. Maybe on an annual basis, the bank charged you $100 or something to keep that account open, right?
Yeah.
But you only pay the interest on what you borrow, right? So if you only need 25,000, you're only paying interest on 25,000, not the full line of credit. The first 10 years, and it can vary with some banks or credit unions, but the first 10 years, the payment on what you borrow is interest only for that first 10 years.
Mm,
So it's pretty manageable from a payment standpoint because you're not paying principal and interest that first
right.
10 years. So from that standpoint, it tends to be a really good tool, I find. If you run into a situation where you need access to that equity later in life and you're having a hard time qualifying, that's potentially where a reverse mortgage scenario comes into play,
Oh,
right? Because a reverse mortgage isn't income dependent. It's age and your age and how much equity you have in your home, right? So there in a sense is very another tool to be able to utilize to maybe bridge to that second home. I've actually I'm in the Bay Area, so we see this a lot here as well, is many people are real estate rich, cash poor, right?
yeah.
And they have they have the single asset as their home, and they have very little liquid assets.
Mm,
And so they've come to the conclusion that the maintenance on the home is too much. It's just doesn't fit them anymore. But the problem tends to be sometimes is the house is older and then they need renovations, right?
yeah. Yeah.
And so how do they address that? A couple different ways. So a lot of real estate companies now will do some type of I wouldn't call it a bridge loan, but they'll lend them the money to do the renovations to get the house prepared to sell. So a lot
Oh,
of
okay.
times that's one option is a lot of the real estate companies will be able to bridge, and let's say the home needs a new roof or it needs something that needs this for it to be
Yeah.
able to sell. They offer that type of thing, service. Another way potentially could be using if you didn't have a home equity line in place already, is a reverse mortgage to extract the equity. So there's different ways to do that. A reverse mortgage can also be used. We talked about in the previous episode to buy a house, right? So
Yeah.
that
What was
home is
that?
such an
But
yeah,
what was
yeah,
for people who may have missed that, Mark? What was that? The guy, it was Mike Rouse, right?
yeah,
Was that who we spoke with? Yeah.
yeah. Mike Rouse.
For those of you who are listening who missed that episode, go back and look at a prior episodes with Mike Rouse because he
Mhm.
goes into much greater detail than we're going to get into in this particular podcast. But it's a very interesting one, and he really does. He did a really good job at dismantling some of the myths and misunderstandings about reverse mortgages.
Yeah, absolutely. I really have. He talks about the application in real life scenarios, and I have
Yes.
plenty of my own where I've seen the home really change. A person's financial well being, right? Where they were so strapped and didn't have a lot of money, but all that money was in the house, right? And so there are a lot of different ways to utilize the equity in the home, right? And that's really my point is talk to your advisor to talk about your options because you really need to understand like how can I best utilize this house. One of the things that I really wanted to bring up today from a financial planning standpoint is, you know as we all get older and we approach our 70s and 80s, there's a really high chance that we're going to need some form of long-term care, right? And
Mm,
so often what I see was when I run these financial plans, that can really disrupt a household, almost bankrupt the household in
oh
regards
yeah.
to going through all their financial investment assets.
Hmm.
And so what it inevitably is left is the house, right? And so what I find when I have clients and I'm showing them the sequence of, okay, here's the next 25 to 30 years. Here's what would happen if you had a long-term care event. This is you first, and let's say your wife is second. And oftentimes what I see is by the time they get to the wife, their assets have really depleted. And
Yeah.
if the market isn't performing, their assets are gone. Often they run out of money. However, the one asset that is left is the house,
Yeah.
right? And so I think it's fair to make some, baseline assumptions, right? If you're doing your planning and you've got a 30-year retirement, you could potentially take that real estate asset and say, all right, let's assume that this asset is going to appreciate at 2 to 3% a year for the next 25 years.
Yeah.
So your $1 million asset today in the future is probably closer to $2 million in 25, 30 years from now, based on that, 2 to 3% inflation.
Right.
So, I mean, strategically using that asset and saying, okay, if we run into this scenario and we both go into long-term care, we should utilize the house as the asset to sell, right?
Mm,
And so I've had a few clients recently that we've run into that saying, showing that, gosh, if this happens to you, it's gonna be a tough circumstance in those later years. However, if we calculate what the home is going to be worth at that time, this is how we bridge the gap, right? And so I think later in that lifespan, if you kind of think about that whole process, more than likely, if you're in long term care, you're going to stay in your home. But if it gets to the point where it's very severe and you start escalating the type of care you need,
yep.
maybe you're not going to be in the house anymore. Maybe it is time to sell that house and have enough money to be able to, you know, um, satisfy all your needs for the rest of your life.
Wow. Yeah. In other words, the short message here is that if you don't have a lot of liquid assets and you own a home, don't despair because you do have an asset that you
Mhm.
can use and can be very beneficial to you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And there are different techniques and strategies to be able to access liquidity and do different things with that house. And I do think it's important to kind of discuss that. If you had a home equity line in place, you wouldn't need to sell the house, right? You could extract the
Yeah.
equity. But if you didn't have it, what other choice do you have but to sell or go down the path of maybe reverse mortgage, or
Hmm.
maybe family can step in at that point, right? It's just, what are the options available to you? And I always like to have a plan A, B, and C at least, right? Like, okay,
Yeah.
what's our contingency plan? How can we best utilize the assets that you have? Obviously, another way to address that is having some type of long-term care insurance. That's another way. Certainly, it's a topic of discussion for another episode. But if you plan early enough, like if you're addressing the long-term care insurance early, I'm saying in your 50s
Yeah.
and maybe 65 to 65 at the peak, then it does make sense, right? That's another tool that you can have in place to kind of counteract this.
Yeah. Yeah. But the trick on long term care is, and we'll get into this in later episodes, is
Uh,
it is expensive, number
right.
one. And when you're in your 40s or early 50s, you're like, I got to pay for kids' educations. I've got colleges. I got other expenses here, and I think a lot of people put off that long term care discussion. Like we can't we'll deal with it later. And then of course
Yeah,
later is always more expensive at that
that's
point.
right. That's
So
right.
that it's good to know that the house can be of some value. There's one part about a house that I'm curious about, and you didn't mention it, but I if I think about it, I think, well, could I rent my home? I mean, I realize that comes with a whole bunch of other headaches, but
Yeah.
can you do people or do you have clients or you ever work with clients who either rent it all or part of their home to create an income?
Yeah, that's a great solution, right? That's another scenario that can happen, right? If you've got a house that's, 4 bedrooms and you've got the space, I see that very commonly, especially in the Bay Area. I think we're the highest rents in the country, one of the
Oh
highest
yeah.
rents in the country, right?
Hmm.
A one bedroom apartment's probably somewhere around $2,500 a month on
Wow.
average, right? So imagine a room that you can rent for 1,000 or $1,500 or two rooms. It makes perfect sense. I actually have friends that I know that live in areas where it's ideal for people in Silicon Valley. So engineers come to the Bay Area. It's too expensive to buy, and it's expensive to rent as well. So an option would be to rent a room, and I think that's a great solution because some of my friends actually will do that, and they will also even Airbnb if they've got the
Ah,
space. Maybe they haven't. The big
yeah.
thing is ADUs, right? And you brought up you made me think about this for a minute, but another big trend in the Bay Area is building those accessory dwelling units, the ADUs, right?
Ah,
And the ADUs can be used for rental income, or, and I've seen this as well, is the owners of the house actually move into the ADU in the backyard and they rent
ah.
out the primary house, right? So they get the most rent for that. So thank you for bringing that up because it's a good point. Using rental income, the ADU is really, I think, I don't know if it's a generational thing, but it's really a really useful, a really good option for
Well,
people.
yeah, funny, because an ADU is going to be smaller than the house, so it's a way to downsize but not
Yeah,
leave the property and create
right.
income. Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Yeah, I love that. I love that strategy. I think we're seeing more and more ADUs pop up. And it can also be used for, building wealth, right? Because it tends
Yeah.
to add value to the
Hmm.
property. And nowadays you're seeing because it's so expensive, children coming back home
Yeah.
or taking care of parents, right? So,
Yeah. Oh,
you know,
yeah.
I think when you utilize the real estate to the maximum ability and think about all the options, I think everybody would be smart to have that discussion. And one of the things that we really, I guess, promote for our firm is, I'm California real estate broker licensed. I've been NMLS licensed, so we can have these real estate conversations
Mm,
based on experience. Not that we're in the real estate sales business, but we just really want to have very
right.
detailed conversations about everything.
Well, yeah. I mean, this whole conversation, like most of the ones that you and I have, really underscore the importance of working with a professional, working with a financial planner. It's somebody who knows what they're talking about, as opposed to people deciding they could do this themselves. Because I'm sure there are lots of pitfalls that you can help people avoid, and, there are always questions, of course, about planning and timing. Yeah, it's good. That's really good. So, if I came to you and said, "Hey, Mark, this is where I am, and I don't think and I'm worried about my money, and I'm worried about where I go." I mean, how do you initiate these kinds of conversations? What is it that you want me, in this case, to think about in terms of possible options or solutions regarding my home and my home equity?
Yeah, I think the biggest one of the first steps is identifying if this is the final home for you first, right?
Okay.
Is this your forever home? That's the first step. And if it is, then let's talk about how do we utilize this in your retirement, right? Do you have the home equity line in place?
Hmm.
We go through that process. If it's not the forever home and your plan was always to move out of state or go somewhere else,
Yeah.
then we walk down that path together and say, let's explore those options. Let's explore what the net equity is after the sales cost and taxes and all of that. And let's walk down that path and model that, buying a new house maybe outright or carrying financing. We go through that process. So it's such an important discussion. And I think if you're not talking about that, you're missing a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, what about if I'm like, what if I'm thinking I don't have a lot of assets and I've got this house and I'm not sure
Yes.
what to do, and I want to, and I do want to leave something to my kids. If that becomes like a really important issue for me, I mean, how do I incorporate any of these options into maybe leaving the house to my heirs, or where does that fit in the scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I had this conversation with somebody yesterday, where the son really wants to inherit the house because of the location in the Bay Area,
Yeah,
right? And so, you know, certainly that comes at a cost of potentially, the owner,
yeah,
right?
right.
Because to
Everything
leave,
has a
to not
cost.
be able
That's
to,
so true.
yeah, not being able to utilize that asset for their retirement comes at, there's an opportunity cost for them. It may have an impact for them. Um, but I would say that, a lot of clients that I've worked with recently, that house is the biggest asset and they don't have a lot of investment assets.
Hmm.
Once we can extract what the net equity is and then figure out how to bridge that to the next home and then take some of those assets and produce the income they need in retirement. At first,
Yeah,
first of all, we address what their needs are. And after we've solved for that, maybe there's X amount of money left over, that once they know that they're fine and that we've covered all the risk that they potentially face, then they've got money they've got earmarked to the kids, where number one, maybe they can give it to them now, because a lot of parents, and want to help the family while they're alive, right?
yeah.
And watch them thrive. So maybe it's the help to pay off or a down payment on a house. They
Mm.
want to be able to gift them now. So once we've done that, gone through that process, maybe once we've identified their needs, now we can really kind of earmark money for the kids, right? And
Yeah,
whether they give it to them now or just earmark it for them for later, just in case, they may need it. It's really up to them, but it gives them that option to be able to leave legacy sooner than later, or at least kind of earmark something so that something's in place.
yeah. No, that makes total sense. It's great.
Mm.
So, if anybody's listening to this podcast who are thinking this conversation is interesting, and maybe I should contact Mark to perhaps explore this idea or explore a relationship with 360 Advisors, what's the best way for them to reach out and get a hold of you?
The best way is to visit our website, which will be in the show notes, or give us a
Hmm.
call, and we have an app where you can schedule an appointment with us. A Zoom call initially usually works, or you're welcome to come into the office. But I love these conversations. It's so dynamic, and this is what kind of drives me every day. I love doing this and talking to clients about, where they've come, how they've gotten to this point in their lives, what's important to them, and going and walking with them through this process.
Yeah, no, that is great. And one of the things, if you're listening and you're not a subscriber, one of the things you can do is really easy. Just hit the follow button. The importance of that is you become a subscriber. And then every time Mark drops a new episode of his podcast, you can give it a listen. It'll also remind you as a subscriber, because you'll see his list of episodes prior, to go back and look up the episode with Mike Rouse. If this conversation interests you, there are some other conversations in there that I think you're going to want to give it a listen to as well. So I would encourage you to do that right now. It's easy. No effort involved. Just hit follow. The other thing I would ask is, if you like the podcast, if you're listening to it and you think this is great, I like this, tell people about it. Let people know. Word of mouth promotion is really welcome, and we would very much appreciate it. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of Mark Taylan and everybody at 360 Advisors, thank you for taking the time to listen, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Dollar Signs Financial Clarity. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at advisors360pwm.com or give us a call at 408 800-778-8280. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Advisors 360. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions that you may have regarding your investment planning. ECA does not provide tax or legal advice. Guest opinions are their own and may not reflect those of ECA. The viewer is encouraged to seek their own individualized tax and legal advice from a qualified professional.